Hi everyone, I hope you're having a great day. I wanted to hop on and share with you a book that I recently finished, and it's Dan Jones's Essex Dogs. I pre-ordered this book last year. I was so excited that when I saw this was going to be published that, like I said, I pre-ordered it. However, for whatever reason, I didn't have a chance to sit down and read it until very recently, and I've got to say this is well worth the wait. Dan Jones is a historian who focuses on the medieval period, specifically in England, and focusing on the Plantagenet dynasty. The Plantagenet dynasty, for anyone who's not familiar, is the dynasty that ruled England when Henry II came into power, Henry II being a descendant of the Conqueror. Um, but this takes place during the late Middle Ages, specifically in the early years of the Hundred Years' War. And the early Hundred Years' War were started because Edward III, one of England's most famous kings, decided that he wanted to take the throne of France because he thought it was his right through his heritage, through his mother, who was a French princess. Um, so when we read history, and Dan Jones focuses on this as well, um, history passes down the deeds, tales, actions, and events that focus really on famous people. So kings, queens, noblemen, um, churchmen. It doesn't focus on normal people. History, normal people are normally lost to us in history. So I was quite surprised and very pleased that Dan Jones decided to focus his book not necessarily on these famous people, but just on ordinary common folk. So as the title suggests, this focuses on a company called the Essex Dogs, who go on campaign in France with Edward's army in his goal of you know forcing the French king to relinquish his crown. So they go on sieges. There's pitched battles. There's chevauchés across the landscape. Everything that you would expect to hear about on during a medieval campaign. So these ordinary men, let me backtrack a bit. So Dan Jones uses very direct and punchy language. When he wants you to feel um, or when he wants to evoke a certain emotion, he does not shy away from describing in very explicit detail what he wants to portray. So, if you're squeamish, this book is not for you. There's a lot that he wants to portray and how just dirty, filthy, disgusting, and dismal, a medieval campaign could be. Just how bored a lot of the time, soldiers could be while they're waiting in between pitch battles or going from place to place between sieges and chevauchés. And there's a lot of sadness, anguish, upset, fear, boredom, like I say, in this book, and I think he does a really good job of portraying these characters' emotions and evoking one from the reader. Um, in one way, I think that the characters are a teensy bit one note, and some of them could have done with a bit more character development. But I'm wondering if he's focusing on a couple of characters in this book, and he'll move on to the other characters in the next books, because this is the first in a planned trilogy. But I don't know. I think some of the characters were kind of a caricature of what you'd expect a blacksmith or an archer or a Scotsman to be in the medieval period, but I think it works in this book. He's trying to focus on the camaraderie amongst very different men, and how their only goal is really just to come home alive. There are certain things that happen in this book that, as a woman from the 21st century, makes me slightly uncomfortable, and that being, violence against women and children, that you'd expect to hear about in a medieval chevauchée or, a raid across the landscape. But, just because it makes me uncomfortable doesn't mean it didn't happen. And I think, Dan Jones wanted to portray what a medieval campaign would be in all of its facets. So that's yeah. I'm not sure what else I can say about this book except it's exciting. It's exactly what I was expecting from Dan Jones. He writes exciting history. He tries to make it enjoyable for people, and I think he did exactly that with this book. Um, I'm not sure if I mentioned, but this book focuses on the army moving through the French countryside, and it culminates in the Battle of Crécy. So there were some well placed, portents or visions of things to come, maybe. So I'm wondering if the next book might focus on, Poitiers, or are we going to focus, is there going to be a very heavy Black Death theme? Because this was written at the time just before the Black Death hits the scene in Europe. Um, and, even though this book was about ordinary men, what I liked was the fact that Dan Jones guides his book through well chronicled events, and he attributes these events to normal men. So there's almost a sense that whilst wars and, the tides of politics are decided by kings and queens and noblemen at this time, I think it showed that normal people still have the power to influence the tide of events. There was one very interesting, this is a spoiler, so if anyone decides to read this book, then switch off now or fast forward. But um, one of the things that I like and what I thought was really clever that Dan Jones did was Edward the Black Prince features heavily in this book, and there's one part in which he sort of alludes to how Edward the Black Prince got his name, the Black Prince, since we don't really know. So I thought that was quite clever. And just on the note of Edward the Black Prince, he does feature heavily in this book, and what I did like is that Dan Jones didn't exactly portray him in the best light. He's what you'd expect of a medieval prince, heir to the throne, bit of a spoiled brat, but still a young man trying to prove himself, someone who just wants to be accepted. And I think hopefully we follow a bit more of him in the next couple of books. So, anyways, I'm rambling on. Didn't exactly have much of a script or an agenda when discussing this book. I just wanted to share this with you and say how much I enjoyed it. So, if you're looking for an exciting book about medieval battles, pick this up. Thanks, BookTube. See you next time.